This content is brought to you by Uphold, which is a great platform that makes it easy and simple for you to buy, hold, and sell and earn crypto. You can trade from anything to anything. For example, you can trade between cryptocurrencies and precious metals. It's an amazing platform that I've been using for years. And in fact, I still use to this day because they're one, a great exchange, they're reputable, and they're one of the only exchanges that still lists XRP. Many of the other exchanges have delisted XRP due to the SEC lawsuit, but you can still get XRP on Uphold. So I've interviewed the CEO, the founder, and many other representatives from Uphold over the years, and I'm a fan of this platform. And once again, there's some great features like trading between different assets very easily. You don't have to convert to a currency and so forth. They're used by 10 plus million users. They have over 200 cryptocurrencies, and they have a very easy to use app. The interface is really nice. So I can certainly vouch for this platform. Once again, I've been a user for years. So if you'd like to learn more about Uphold, please visit the link in the description. Welcome back to the Thinking Crypto podcast, your home for cryptocurrency news and interviews. With me today is Eleanor Terrett, who's a journalist and producer at Fox Business. Ellie, great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me, Tony. Pleasure to join you.
Ellie, there's a lot to talk about on the research and journalism you and the folks at Fox Business have been doing on the SEC lawsuit. There have been some big updates yesterday as well as today. Before we get there, we'd like to get to know you a bit better. Where are you from and how did you become a journalist?
So I am actually from the United Kingdom, from England, and a lot of people don't know that because I don't sound like I'm from the UK. I don't have an accent, but I did move here when I was 9 years old. So that was about fourth grade. So I was very impressionable and wanted to sound like my American friends. So
Mhm.
that's the reason I don't sound like a Brit, although I can put the accent back on, even though it sounds a bit fake to me now. But yes, I was born in the UK. I moved over to the States when I was 9 years old because my dad is a reporter. He's still a reporter, but at the time he was with the BBC and they moved him over here for a year. It was supposed to be a year. And then it's actually turned into 20 now. So
Wow.
I know it's December will be 20 years of being in the US. And never thought I'd be here. Never thought I'd end up in New York. I actually live in New Jersey across the river, but Fox headquarters is here and I work here 5 days a week. So I am a Brit living in New York and I love it.
So did you want to become a journalist because your dad was in the field and it was kind of like something that you knew of and it's something that appealed to you?
Kind of, yeah. So I always knew that I enjoyed kind of the dramatics, right? So my dad's been a reporter my whole life. I used to go to work with him. He would bring me to Broadcast Center in London, where the BBC headquarters are. And, I'd sit in the studio, I'd play around with the microphones, I'd put on like fake shows, and I enjoyed it a lot. And I always thought maybe I would take up this kind of career path one day. But when I graduated high school, I was determined to go into PR. That was kind of the cool job that all my girlfriends were going into, communications and PR. So that's what I decided to major in. And about halfway through college, I decided it wasn't really what I wanted to graduate with. I was kind of nervous. I know because these days you can graduate with a degree and actually do absolutely nothing towards, do nothing with that degree. You could graduate with anthropology and, become a journalist. And that's so at the time I was a little nervous and I didn't know that that was a thing. I was like, all right, I just want to graduate with something that I know I want to stick with after college. So I took a semester off. And during that time, I went to be a production assistant, sort of an intern position, because I was just off for a semester at Al Jazeera America, which was a news organization based here in New York. And I became a PA. So I was cutting video, running scripts for anchors, very kind of entry level, foot in the door stuff. And I really, really fell in love with it. So once my semester home was over, I went back to JMU and I continued working at Al Jazeera on the weekend. So I would drive up to New York on a Friday, do the weekend shift, drive back to Virginia on a Monday to do my classes. So that's kind of when I knew I really loved the production side of it. And then once I graduated, I applied to Fox. Was my first job out of college. And I did start as a PA here, actually as a guest greeter. So similar things, running scripts to anchors, bringing guests to hair and makeup. And then I was a production assistant again, doing cutting video, writing scripts, kind of more doing field stuff as well. So I would go out with the reporters and do like live shots and packages that would roll in the network the next day. And then somewhere around going down to the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, I decided I think I kind of want to do this, front of the camera for a living. And I kind of decided then and there that I wanted to pursue an on-camera role. And, my dad has been doing it his whole life. So I like to think that it's in my blood and I kind of have a flair for it. I hope I do, and I'm not just blowing smoke. Um, but yeah, so I mean, really, I never planned on it. I thought I would be PR communications my whole life, but I guess it kind of all rolls into one, right? Like communications, PR, journalism, they're very similar fields. So yeah, here I am. And it all kind of started with being on the floor of the exchange, watching the reporters do their live hits from the floor, and got up there on a box, and we had a little like Apple box, our camera that pointed down, on the floor of the exchange. We're shorter, and my reporters and I would always have an Apple box to stand on. So at the end of the day, at 4 o'clock, when everybody went home, all the traders left, I would stand up on the Apple box and practice and just run through what happened in the markets that day, the Dow, how it finished, the S&P, stocks, and I got more confident. And then I started working with Charlie. And the great thing about Charlie is that he's a great mentor, right? He's been around the block. He was a Wall Street Journal reporter. He went to CNBC. He's been with Fox for the last 10 years. So he's really, a veteran in this industry. And what he's best at is fostering young talent. So all the producers before me have gone on to do great roles at the New York Post, CNBC. They've all been hired as either, on talent TV, on TV talent, or as like prestigious writers for prestigious publications. So I hope to be able to do that once I've graduated from Charlie. But that kind of solidified my thinking, like, okay, I'm in a good space. I have a great mentor who's helping me not just write better, but perform better, research better. So that's where I am, and that's how I ended up here.
Very cool. Love it. And like you said, it's probably running in your blood, given your dad's been doing it.
Actually, and my mom did it too for a little bit. My mom was
Oh,
a
no
traffic
way.
reporter and in the
Wow.
UK, and that's how her and my dad met. So kind of doubly as well. My
Yeah.
sister's a nurse. My sister was like, I don't want anything to do with this business. I'm going into nursing.
Very cool. So tell me about how did you and Charles come across the Ripple lawsuit situation and decided to investigate and cover the story?
Yeah. So I would say it is just a little over a year since we first heard about this. And actually, Charlie had done some reporting on the Brooklyn Project back in 2018. And the Brooklyn Project was where a couple top officials, I think it was a consensus, were trying to create the first SEC sanctioned self regulatory organization within crypto. And they had told Charlie this at a dinner, I believe. And Charlie reported this on the network the next day. And then they came back and said, oh, actually, it's not SEC sanctioned. But Charlie was like, told me it was SEC sanctioned and that you've had conversations with the SEC. And keep in mind, this is like the Joe Lubins and the people at Consensus who, were may or may not have been having meetings with the SEC at the time. So, he reported that. They came back with, no, it's actually not true. And that ended up on John Deaton's crypto law timeline. I remember seeing, Charlie's video where he broke it on Liz Clayman's show. He did a tweet about it as well. So Charlie had kind of already touched on a little bit of it. And then it was September 14th, I believe, of last year. We got a tweet from John saying, Liz Clayman, Charlie Gasparino, you have the opportunity to report on one of the biggest financial stories in recent memory. Will you? And Charlie saw it and said, I will report. So from there, we kind of did some sleuthing, I guess. We looked at John's crypto law, and as well as I do, how detailed
Yeah.
and packed with information it was. So we looked at it. We did our own research. We talked to, and I feel like I say this whenever I get interviewed about it, like we talked to the players involved, but that's really like, because there was so much, I say evidence, there was so much stuff to go through, but we, as journalists, we had to go through it and corroborate literally everything and talk to everybody and get their side of it. So we did that. And, from September to November, we were really educating ourselves on the topic, talking to people. And then the week of Thanksgiving, I think it was the week of Thanksgiving, we released the 10,000 word opus that we like to call it, the rundown of the Ripple SEC case, what led to it, who was involved. And it got pretty good reception. I know people were waiting for it for a while because I think we were really the only mainstream media outlet to address it,
Right.
especially in so much detail. So that's really how we got into it. And then from there, it just kind of snowballed, right? Like
Yeah.
that, and the court case has obviously been going on for, the last 2 years. So we've been following the judge's updates and all the filings, and it's been a crazy year, but so interesting, and really how I got my sort of interest in crypto. That's kind of what kicked off my love for, reporting on crypto, the regulatory side, but then also, the technology side, learning about the blockchain, learning about all the cool projects that are on the blockchain and will be on the blockchain in the future.
Wow, what a way to get introed into the crypto market.
I know. Well, the XRP community was like, it was like a explosion. We're like, oh, okay, like there's a whole community of people behind this, and they are so passionate. And like there's the community of the AMC apes on Twitter who Charlie likes to do battle with sometimes, and it kind of opened our eyes up to, wow, there's real communities here on Twitter, and they are passionate about what they believe in, and they all come together and they have your back if they don't like you. And I think BitBoy tweeted something about this early. He was like, if you piss off the XRP army, you're done, because they will dig up some dirt and they will send you to your grave.
Yeah, I remember talking to macro investor Raul Powell about this, and it's Metcalfe's law with financial incentives at play, where the token holders, they now have equity. It's an equitable asset class, and that you have say and change on. So people are much more invested, and it's an interesting dynamic to watch play out.
Yeah, it definitely is. And the way it's boomed, in the last, especially over the pandemic, because
Mm.
I'd heard of crypto, I obviously it was thought up by Mr. Nakamoto in 2008, Bitcoin was, and then all the other projects came. But I really started hearing about it in 2018. I'd say when I was down on the floor of the exchange, I'd hear the traders talk about it. Some of my friends were investing, and I kind of respected it, and I didn't really understand it. And I kind of just said, all right, that seems like it's going to go places in the future. And especially during the pandemic, I think when everybody was stuck at home and they were like, what do I do? Oh, let me
Yeah.
invest. Let me invest in the stock market. And crypto seems like it's going bananas. Let me invest in crypto. So just even over the last 2 or 3 years, the growth we've seen in this industry is just phenomenal.
So I have to ask, have you started investing in crypto? What are you holding in your portfolio?
Yeah, so I do not own any crypto currently. Part of the reason is because I really only started getting into, learning about crypto last year when like I said, when we first started reporting on the Ripple SEC case. And, ever since then, I've almost been a little worried that if I do invest, it might, pose a conflict of interest. It might look like if I report on something, then, maybe I'm trying to push it in a certain way or a certain narrative, which absolutely I would not do, even if I did hold crypto. Um, I'd like some time to be able to just sit down and, open a wallet and really just like get to know like the space a little bit more, like the crypto exchanges. What's the best one to download? What's the best coin to hold? And it's not even just like holding the coins, right? It's like investing. So like, what do you believe is going to be a great investment? And I know I'm sure you believe XRP will be a great investment. Others believe Bitcoin, others believe Ethereum. And I think it's interesting because a lot of people who obviously believe in XRP, they also hold like John Deaton. And I think yourself as well, you said you own Bitcoin and Ethereum. I heard that in an interview
Yep.
you did previously. Am I right in saying that?
Oh yeah, I'm diversified. I
Yeah,
believe there's not going to be just one winner. It's going to be
right.
like the dot-com boom. There's going to be your Google, your Amazon, your eBay, and so forth.
Right, right. And so I just wanted, I want to be able to sit down and take the time to really put some thought into it. And I hope to be able to do that soon. I'm through the other side now where it's like, I don't think if I own crypto, it's such a conflict of interest. I think I will disclose. If I do buy, I'll disclose everything I own. And I think that's enough. But there's always been a little bit of a stigma around like financial journalists owning the stocks that they report on. It's got to be like massive disclosure. And I didn't want anything to, like to jeopardize my reporting, I guess. But I am 100% down to buy crypto in the future, and I hope it will be soon.
Well, I definitely respect that, and I certainly understand your perspective in trying to learn about it and so on and so forth. Um, let's talk about the lawsuit. My goodness, yesterday we had Judge Torres, essentially tell the SEC, "Hey, you have to hand over Bill Hinman's emails." Following in Judge Sarah Net Burns' order as well. Today we had two new amicus brief applications filed by Tabjet and iRemit. What is your take on what's happening in this lawsuit and the dynamic between Ripple and the SEC?
Wow, that's a loaded question.
Yeah.
Well, let's start with today. I think um, the amicus briefs, they will help Ripple, I believe. It seems like they will go a long way with helping Ripple in the case. Obviously we were waiting for the Digital Chamber of Commerce to come out with theirs. They said they were going to do one. I read through it today. It doesn't seem to take a side. It doesn't say, we believe XRP isn't a security. And it doesn't say, we believe the SEC is right. It kind of goes down the middle and says, we endorse or we believe that this case is going to have, it's going to set a precedent for the rest of the crypto community, cryptoverse down the line. This is going to have big implications. So, they're kind of lending their hand and saying, this is an important case. Make sure you get it right. But they don't say, who should get it right and who should win.
Yeah.
I know there's people like John Deaton who say they could have gone a little harder. They could have maybe, showed their cards a little more. But I respect the fact, the need to be impartial. And as a journalist, I know that better than anyone to kind of give everybody the fair treatment on both sides. So the other two, I believe it was Tapjet and iRemit, they submitted their applications for amicus brief today. And those seemed more to be in the favor of Ripple. Both of them said they use XRP as a currency, and they both believe it not to be a security. And they give reasons why, and they cite, their business models and how their business model depends on XRP or is, largely helped by XRP as a currency. And I believe that'll go, if the judge allows them in court, they allow the applications to be read and digested. I believe that'll go a long way to helping Ripple. And it kind of seems like this whole week has been a win for Ripple, right? Just the news that's come out. We got the Hinman calendar, which I'll go into later. We got the ruling from Judge Torres that said the SEC has to turn over those documents. I think it was the sixth time she said that, or at least the court has said that, because it's been a year of them trying to evade that and trying to get out of showing those documents. But finally, yesterday, she came out and said, no, you have to show them. So really, this whole week has been kind of a party for Ripple, just because it's like, all right, it's all these great headlines, and the SEC seems to be, also, as a journalist, I reached out to the SEC quite a bit, and they declined to comment on pretty much everything. Unless there's something that we write that they don't like and there's a correction that they want to make. Like, for example, the other day when I wrote an article about Brad, when Brad was on the network saying that the case will likely not go to a jury, I had said, mentioned the Hinman speech, and I'd said it seemed that the SEC had taken a stance on Bitcoin and Ethereum with Bill Hinman's speech back in 2018, something along those lines, or the SEC took a stance. And then they came back and said, that's incorrect. We've never taken a stance on Ether. So they'll come back with stuff that they don't like, but they won't comment on the case. And I think that is, I know they're a government agency. I think that's it's not doing them any favors, because you see how vocal Stu Alderati is, for example, Ripple's general counsel, how open he is to kind of, giving his insight and his thoughts. And Brad Garlinghouse is the head of the company, kind of, giving his opinions and his thoughts and being open to people. And I feel like the SEC is just closed off and just doing things their own way, which is fine. But, maybe just giving some comments, some, color. And this is my first time really dealing with a government agency like that. And as on the journalistic side. So I don't know if like all government agencies are like that, but I feel like it is doing them a bit of a disservice just to remain quiet, because it just seems that, it's kind of giving Ripple all the attention, as it were.
What's surprising, what you just mentioned, that they're listening, they're watching, and they contacted you saying, hey, this is incorrect. I find that very fascinating that they're spending their time doing that as well.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't always have, let's say, a great relationship with them. When I first started working for Charlie, we weren't covering, as much of the SEC as we were when we started reporting on the Ripple case. But there were a couple of instances where I would reach out to their Slack and say, this is what Charlie's reporting. And Charlie and I do that all the time. We're going to report something or say something that, is about a certain person or an organization. We'll reach out to them and say, hey, this is what we're reporting. Is this okay? Just to let you know. If there's any issue, factual issue, we'll change it. But we recently had a conversation with the SEC Slack. I'd say it was about a couple months ago. And they took issue with an article that we'd written about Gary. I think it was something, him being potentially Treasury Secretary, wanting to be Treasury Secretary, and his staff not being necessarily like happy under his rule and people leaving, et cetera. The morale was down at the SEC. That's what we reported. And they took issue with a couple of things that we said. We said that the SEC's mission is to protect the small investor, right? But they took issue and said, no, we actually protect all investors. So there were very small little nitpicks. But ever since then, because they stopped answering us for a while, like I would email them and say, we're going to say this, this, and this, and I'd never heard back. So, when they came back with that change, I was like, okay, let's establish, like, whenever we write something, we'll send it to you. If you don't like it, let us know. And if it's wrong, let us know. So recently they've been very responsive to Charlie and I's reporting. We'll send them what we're going to say, and they'll either say, no comment, which is, 99.9% of the time they'll say no comment, or, they'll fix or change something that they don't necessarily agree with. But in that vein, Bill Hinman did say Bitcoin and Ethereum are not securities. They do not seem to be securities. And the market took it as guidance. And you do a quick Google search, and every financial outlet in the world, in the country, was reporting, SEC official gives blessing to Bitcoin, Ethereum. The prices have both jumped. And now they say they haven't taken a stance. It's just, it's semantics. It's he said, she said, and it's a lot.
Yeah.
but they have been more responsive, and I appreciate the fact that we have a better relationship with them as journalists. And
for sure. But I think you see it too, that the public is losing confidence in the SEC. And I think, from my perspective, I'm just seeing them lacking integrity in the way they're handling certain things, to your point, not speaking up and kind of staying quiet on certain issues. And people are seeing the dichotomy between Bill Hinman's speech, and it's on their website, sec.gov, and commissioners, even Chair Clayton at the time, they all endorsed it. So it's like, what is going on? And I think the judge at one point, I think it was Sarah Nepron, who called out and said the hypocrisy, like, you can't have it both ways. So I'm curious, based on the research you've been doing, and you recently you mentioned you were going through Bill Hinman's calendar. What did you find there, and what are some of the major takeaways?
So the biggest takeaways for me from Hinman's calendar was the fact that it corroborated a lot of the timeline that Crypto Law, John Deaton's firm, had laid out, right? So we knew that there were meetings between Consensus and Bill Hinman. We knew that there were possible meetings between Joe Lubin and Bill Hinman, but we couldn't prove it. There was a degree of uncertainty there. And going through this calendar, there were indeed meetings between Consensus, at least two that I saw, just Consensus themselves, one with Consensus's general counsel, and then one with Joe Lubin. So there were definitely meetings between them and the SEC. It's TBD whether Bill Hinman was in on all of them, because some of those meetings, and I'll get to that in a minute, were meetings of his colleagues and other SEC officials that he wasn't involved in personally or physically. He was supposed to be there maybe, but he actually wasn't there. What I mean by that, an example, is the other thing that stood out to me about his calendar was that the day he gave that speech in San Francisco on June 14th, 2018, he on his schedule, on this document that we received, it said a meeting with Ripple, and it was a 2-hour meeting, I believe, with Ripple counsel, and that was the morning of the speech. And it didn't even say on the speech that the night before, the morning of. you'd think it would say traveling to San Francisco or Yahoo Finance All Market Summit, but it didn't. It didn't say he was anywhere, other than DC. So I reached out to Ripple, and they confirmed that they did have a meeting with the SEC. Bill Hinman wasn't present. So, going back to what I said before, I'm not sure if he was in all those meetings, but they definitely had meetings with the SEC and SEC officials. So I thought that was really interesting. Another thing I thought was interesting was that there were more meetings with Ripple and the SEC than previously thought, or that Charlie and I had previously known about or reported. I'd say there were about a dozen meetings between 2018 and 2020 when they brought the lawsuit between Ripple or Ripple's counsel and the SEC. And I think the narrative before that, especially for the XRP community, people thought that there were way less meetings with Ripple and way more with, Lubin and Consensus and, top people at Ethereum. But it seems to me that Ripple did meet quite a bit with them. What those meetings were about, I have no idea. Did they know they were going to bring a lawsuit? I have no idea. But that stood out to me as well. Something else I found out that I didn't know before was the involvement of Val. And I don't know how to say her last name, but I'm not going to try because I know I'm going to butcher it. But she was known as the crypto czar. She had a meeting weekly with Bill Hinman on cryptocurrency. So she was very involved in not just, the talks with Ripple or the meetings with Ripple and the meetings with Consensus and all the digital asset talks that were going on at the SEC at the time. She was right there. So I think she would be a great person to talk to. I saw her speak recently at the Blockworks Digital Asset Summit, and I couldn't quite catch her at the end to catch up and talk to her. And she's still employed by the SEC, so I'm not sure, how much she would be able to talk about the case. But she was definitely in on a lot of those meetings, and seems like, would have been around when those policies or, decisions, high up level decisions were being made. So she'd be a good person to interview. I definitely plan on reaching out to her, but her name cropped up quite a lot on the calendar. So that stuck out to me as well.
Interesting. I also saw John Deaton post that the calendar that the information that you got regarding Bill Hinman's calendar, there was a lot of meetings omitted from that calendar, it appears like. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I saw that tweet as well. And I didn't go through and compare, what meetings were that John might have found that weren't on the calendar. I saw his tweet, but I mean, I would imagine it's true because the glaring one for me was that Bill Hinman wasn't in San Francisco for his meeting, for his Yahoo Finance speech, the one that we all know he did and saw he did on video. On that agenda calendar, it says he wasn't there. It says he was in DC and had meetings with Ripple and other people throughout the day. So that doesn't surprise me. But is it intentionally omitted? I don't know. Is it Bill Hinman's just DC calendar? Was it just him, the engagements that he was supposed to have in DC with other members of the SEC, not necessarily like his movements, like word for word, day to day kind of thing? Maybe. John says the SEC likes to play games. They've definitely played, they played to their advantage in the past. I wouldn't be surprised if they omitted some things, but then why omit something that we know happened, like the speech, and not omit meetings with Consensus and Lubin, which they know Ripple and people are trying to look for? Makes no sense, but I would imagine that there's probably some omissions there.
So what are your thoughts on the potential conflicts of interest with the former SEC official Bill Hinman?
Well, I've said all along, I believe that the conflicts of interest here are pretty obvious. They're pretty glaring, right? So we go through everything from the meetings with the top official at Ethereum to the potential ethics violations that Bill Hinman committed when he was in office. And, we don't know how the SEC, treats that, right? We don't know if in the eyes of the SEC, what Bill Hinman did, having lunch with a former Simpson and Thatcher partner, buying lunch next to each other, we don't know if that is actually violating their rules, right? It looks to us, to people who are, all over this lawsuit and people have been following it from the beginning, it looks a little sketchy. And then the fact that they were kind of bantering back and forth about it, being like, do you want to buy lunch next to me, again, next time? And I know people have kind of said, they're making fun of, their position, they're taking advantage, but, we don't really know the tone and really how it went down.
Sure.
I do think that there's something to be said for a possible investigation by the ethics office, just in terms of, did we miss anything? Was something overlooked? Could, that speech have been run through our department maybe a couple more times? Could we have caught the fact that, Bill Hinman was, a Simpson and Thatcher employee? They were part of the Ethereum Enterprise Alliance, even though they aren't anymore. Apparently they left the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance.
Yeah.
And these are little things, right? Like in hindsight, like, maybe they could have caught that. Maybe it didn't seem like a big deal to them at the time. Maybe they just didn't make the connection. But I think it wouldn't hurt to do maybe an investigation. And I think that would help restore confidence, especially, people who have been following this lawsuit, investors, people who have just kind of seen the emails, seen the correspondence, and seen how the SEC has been behaving. And they have really lost, if not respect, just confidence for these people that are put in power to protect them.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would go a long way.
Yeah, absolutely. What is your take on this whole lawsuit situation and potential conflicts of interest? Is this like a scandalous story compared to other stories in different asset classes and industries?
So as someone who's like relatively new to the industry and someone whose first investigative piece was the XRP SEC Ripple lawsuit. Yeah, I think it, to an outsider, it would certainly seem that these conflicts of interest are quite glaring. And I've said that before in other interviews. There's almost too many like just neat coincidences, right? And I feel like the community sees that. And I feel like even other people here, when we talk about the case, Charlie and I at Fox, they're like, oh, like, that's interesting. Like, why would that person have not revealed that meeting with this person? And then why would Bill Hinman have, broken those ethics? Why would he have violated those ethics rules that were, so tantamount to, being an SEC official? I think there's definitely been other financial scandals that have been, more high profile. I think this, because it's crypto, is a little more like low profile. But I think Charlie and I, and obviously other journalists too, like Rosalind Layton has done a great job. Obviously, John Deaton's done a great job of, bringing these conflicts of interest out into the open and really kind of laying out the timeline and talking about the scope of, just how big the implications are here. I think, yeah, it's definitely up there and it's getting up there. And I think the more we talk about it and the more we expose it, hopefully more high profile it will be.
Sure. I want to circle back to the amicus briefs. Are you personally anticipating more applicants throwing their hat in the ring?
I think so. And I spoke to John about this, John Deaton, and he said that he expects at least 2 to 4 more amicus briefs to come. I know he's supposed to be filing his relatively soon, but we have the one from the Digital Chamber, the one from the Jet Company, and then the one company uses RippleNet. So that's 3. And then he said 2 to 4 more. I wouldn't be surprised. And I think, yeah, it's interesting because the people are really just going in for supporting Ripple, right? We're not seeing any amicus briefs on the side of the SEC. And I think that's interesting. I mean, maybe we will see. I don't know. But I think there'll be more to come as more people find out about it, as more the conversation kind of goes on and people realize in this space how important this case is to the rest of crypto and to what we could see, 10, 20 years down the line. I think people will throw their hat in the ring. Who? I'm not sure. It'll be interesting to see, but I think there's a deadline, right? I'm not sure about that. They have to have it in by a certain point because the SEC has actually asked for an extension. If there are any more amicus briefs, then they want an extension to be able to review them.
Mm.
I'm
Yeah,
not sure if that timeline is if that deadline is coming up this year, but there's so many deadlines, you know, there's so
yeah,
many dates, and it's like to remember like which one's next.
for sure. Um, Final question here as it relates to the lawsuit. What's your prediction, so to speak, as far as an outcome, if you have one?
So I think it all comes down to how the judge rules on this thing, right? So they've described the SEC's behavior as hypocritical. Their tone, I feel like, is just a bit fed up with how the SEC lawyers have been behaving. And I think if it's down to the judge, I agree with Brad Garlinghouse as well. I think this probably won't go to a jury. I feel like there are facts. I'm not a lawyer, but I do feel like the facts in the situation and the case were presented very well, especially by Ripple. So I think we could see a resolution by the judge. I don't think it'll go to a trial. And I do think it'll go way into next year. Like people are saying, I think, possibly March would be the earliest, potentially May, but then we don't know now because, if the SEC delays with the Hinman emails, trying to produce the Hinman emails, then that could add another 2 to 3 months, according to James Filan, the XRP community lawyer. So I don't think there'll be a settlement either. The only way there'll be a settlement is if the SEC concedes that XRP is not a security, or today's XRP is not a security,
Right.
and that it's not a security on the secondary market. I think that's the only way Ripple will settle. And Stu Alderati was the one who told me that. And he's been saying that all along. And I think Brad said that too. But then again, Gary Gensler is determined to, you know, not necessarily win this case, but to win over crypto. I believe he wants to go out with a bang. If we get a Republican president down the line, then he's probably going to be out. And I think in the meantime, he wants to make his mark and be the one to say, I was the one who regulated crypto. So, the SEC is determined as well. But the implications and the way that the judges are, kind of the tone of them right now, it just seems that could be a potential win on the side of Ripple.
Yeah, we'll have to see. But to your point, things are shaping up in a way where the judges and the procedural process for it's kind of moving in Ripple's direction. But we'll see what happens. Got some wrap up questions here for you. First, rapid fire. Favorite food?
Favorite food, chocolate.
Favorite music?
British chocolate, though, not Hershey. I hate Hershey. So Cadbury, Dairy Milk, Galaxy are my favorite.
Oh, of course. I mean, you're from the UK.
Yeah.
Cadbury. Favorite musician or band?
Favorite musician or band? Oh goodness. Harry Styles.
Favorite movie?
Favorite movie would be Atonement. And that was actually a book, but it was made into a movie. It's a World War II romance.
I'll have to check that out. Favorite book?
Harry Potter, hands down.
And when you're not working at Fox Business, what are you doing for a hobby?
Ooh, I like to work out. I like to run. I like to do yoga. And what else? I feel like work is my life. Oh goodness, oh goodness, oh goodness. Play with my cat.
And finally, if you could create your own metaverse, what would the theme be?
Harry Potter. 100%. I would live in that world all day, every day.
Awesome. Ellie, pleasure chatting with you. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Tony.